technology instead. But this is OFS 204. My name is Alistair Spears. I'm a Senior Product Manager in Microsoft Office Division, based over in Redmond. And today I'm here with Yoni Kirsch.
Hey guys, I'm Yoni. I'm an Office deployment geek, and I work for Fast Track Technology.
And today we're going to take you through building a fully functional deployment environment for free. So hopefully most of you got a USB key as you walked in. What we'll be taking you through here is the content of that USB key. It is what we call our desktop proof of concept kit. It was built with Windows and Office and AppV, System Center, MDT, a whole lot of deployment planning tools to help you get up to speed with desktop deployments in a manageable and modern way as fast as possible. And really the thinking behind this was, wouldn't it be just awesome if Microsoft gave me a VHD that had everything I could possibly want about desktop deployment? I guess we should probably say, well, yes, it would. Everything you could reasonably want, perhaps not everything possibly. But really what this key is, it's loaded with trial copies of Windows, trial copies of Office, trial copies of all the servers, so you can set it up, run it up, and play with it. And you can build the same thing yourself with your own licensed versions of the products, but all the deployment tools are free. So what's in it? There's 14 execution guides. There's 330 plus pages of technical content to walk you through deploying everything. There's 8 deployment tools that we'll deploy. There's 9 products that we'll deploy in this desktop. There's 15 products that we install on the deployment server that you can possibly configure and deploy. There's a deployment dashboard. There's a 27 gig deployment server on that USB key in RAR format. It's free. And you can deploy as many clients and a proof of concept as you could possibly want using this kit. So it's a pretty good start. To get into more detail on what is actually on the kit, there's the assessment and compatibility tools, things like the map toolkit, application compatibility toolkit, the Office Migration Planning Manager, the environmental assessment tool, the compatibility code inspector, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, Office Customization Tool, System Center Configuration Manager, Windows Server, SQL Server, Forefront Server, Office 2010, Visio 2010. There's a lot on this kit. And if some of these acronyms sound a little bit foreign to you, it's okay. We'll be walking you through what these do in this session as well. And so what we'll actually deploy is Windows 7, Office Pro Plus, AppV 4.6, Visio Premium, Project Professional, Forefront Client Security. We'll also deploy the online services sign-in assistant for getting ready for Office 365, as well as Silverlight and some of the training tools as well through this desktop kit. So it is fairly all-encompassing. We update this thing about every 6 months, so there'll be an update coming soon. The kit we gave you still has Internet Explorer 8 on it and some of the older versions of some of these products, but really the fundamentals haven't changed that much, and you can look out for a 27 gig download soon with all the new stuff as well. Which will be a little bit later, perhaps.
Maybe it won't
November,
be quite
December.
27 gig this time.
Sorry?
Maybe it won't be quite 27 gig this time.
Yeah, we'll clean up deleted items from the...
I wasn't going to say anything.
So perhaps I'll throw over to you, Yoni, to kick it off and show us what this kit can do.
Thanks, Al. So what we might do is just jump over to the kit here. I've got one set up in the big funky virtual cloud that they've got here at TechEd this year. So when you fire this POC server up for the first, actually maybe we'll take a step back quickly and speak through the first steps that you need to go through from what you've got on your USB sticks to get to here. So basically, as Alistair said, there's a VHD file that's in RAR format. So you need to extract that out and then load it up, and I believe it works on VPC or Hyper-V.
Or Hyper-V.
So just you need to create a new Hyper-V virtual machine and boot up off this VHD file, and you should find yourself prompted with a screen that looks roughly like this. We're a bit short on resolution here, so I'll try and, yeah. So it comes out something like that. And what you can see is that the team have put a Visio splash page together, which will monitor your progress and step you through the different stages of the process. So you can see here we've got some steps to carry out in terms of Windows and Office readiness using MAP, and then we've got some application compatibility steps here, Office compatibility, And if you just scroll down now,
Sure.
you can see that we step into the light touch and zero touch deployments. Now you'll see that some of these have been ticked off as green. This happens automatically once you've completed them, so you can keep track of it. I think that's pretty cool. The reason they're green in this case is because I've been testing stuff out this morning. So yeah, so that's what you're prompted with. A couple of things you might need to consider when you fire it up for the first time. It will probably prompt you for a key because the grace period is expired on the server. You should find a batch script on the desktop that will rearm that for you. So if you need to rearm it, then you can just double click on that and it'll reboot and away it goes. So you can see here there's a few shortcuts on the desktop, but mostly you'll find that there's a fair amount of content living in the C drive here. So we've got a few things to look at here. All the Office Compat tools are sitting there. And you'll find that there are some sample files sitting there and some MDT Workbench stuff sitting there. So we'll go into all that in a little bit more detail shortly. What I wanted to do quickly was show you how to kick off a light touch deployment. And I suppose I'm assuming this is a 200 level session, so we're going to take quite a basic look at light touch and zero touch deployment. If you're looking for a more in-depth look at those technologies, then there's probably some other sessions to go to. I'd suggest straight after this, 9:45, there's a config MDT 2012. Is it, Mike? Is it the 2012 the config manager or the MDT one straight after this? So MDT straight after this in somewhere. I should have checked that. 1A. And then there's a config manager one later on. So I'd suggest if you want some more detailed look at the MDT stuff and the config manager, zero touch and light touch, to have a look at those sessions. Sorry?
Let's kick it off.
Yeah. So in the meantime, let's get a deployment happening. Just give me a second here.
So many different virtual machines have you got here running, Yoni?
So I've got 3 at the moment. We've got the proof of concept server that we were just looking at. Mm-hmm. We've got so we have the proof of concept server that we were just looking at a second ago, and we have one machine that I'm building at the moment that we'll show you some stuff on a little bit later, and another one that we're going to kick off now.
Great. So
what I've done here is I've just built a blank virtual machine. I'll throw that up into full screen mode. And we can see here that I've configured it with a legacy network adapter. And it's going to boot off straight away off our Windows Deployment Services server. And we'll let that finish and come back to it in a moment.
Great.
Go back to your slide deck there.
Thanks. So the first step in an Office 2010 and Windows 7 deployment is planning and compatibility. Now, in just full disclosure, I'm an Office guy, so I like to speak a lot more about the Office stuff. Yeah, I think Windows 7 is a fantastic operating system, primarily because it runs Office. But there's a lot of tools that we provide that really help you getting up to speed with some of your desktop deployment requirements. I think desktop deployment is kind of a very interesting area for a number of reasons. First, there's the system readiness aspect, and that's fairly well understood. We know that there's minimum system requirements that we need to meet. We have a tool called the Microsoft Assessment Planning Toolkit to really help you analyze that, as well as analyze the applications that you have installed on your images today and whether they're compatible or not.
Probably worth mentioning that if you're a config manager shop, if you run System Center Configuration Manager, then the information on hardware readiness and system readiness that you could get out of Config Manager would be, in most cases, superior to what you'd get out of MAP.
Absolutely.
So if you're already a Config Manager shop, you'd probably just use, there's actually some built-in reports that say, system is, meets system requirements for Windows 7 or doesn't meet. So I'd say those probably more valuable.
Yeah, but the MAP kit is free. So that's a great thing there, and that's the focus of this session is free stuff. Then we have file readiness, and file readiness is a very Office-specific sort of requirement. Is anyone around for perhaps an Office 97 upgrade? 95, 97, yeah? Anyone do Office 2003 to 2007? Yeah. So those are the two big upgrades where we actually change file formats on you. Office 2010 is much nicer if you're already on 2007, much easier. If you're on 2003, you do have to migrate, and there are file considerations to make. The good news is we have a lot of tools to help. The first one, affectionately known as OMPOM, the Office Migration Planning Manager tool. This is a tool that will scan documents, it will scan file shares, and it will let you know what the compatibility state is of those files, whether they'll run without issue in Office 2010, whether you're using certain features, whether they have macros involved, and we'll step you through that a little bit later. We also have another tool, more for the developers, as the Office Compatibility Code Inspector. So what this will do is that when you're running a macro, it will analyze that macro line by line and let you know what may be broken in a newer version and what's not as well. There's also a plugin for Visual Studio if you're doing anything with Visual Studio tools for Office and .NET add-ins into Office. Anyone doing that? A couple of people? Okay. We'll focus more on the macro stuff. And finally, there's the Office Environment Assessment tool. This is an interesting tool that analyzes your Office setup for add-ins that you may have running in Office. Who doesn't have any add-ins running with Office? Anyone? No. Okay, good. Yeah. All sorts of applications will throw in add-ins into Office, whether it's your document management system, whether it's just other Microsoft products that seem to add in Bluetooth helper into Office or anything like that, whether it's iTunes that has a tendency to add in DLLs into Outlook and all sorts of things. Snagit, yeah, all sorts of things that will work with Office.
Every Adobe product ever made.
Every Adobe product ever made. There's quite a few of them. And so this tool actually just gives you a little bit of an analysis of what they are and where they're running and whether they're compatible.
Let's just jump back to the...
Sure, let's jump back and see where we're at with the desktop build.
So guys, I've just left that to boot up into Windows PE. And you'll see, and this is the behavior straight out of the box. If you created a blank virtual machine after you ran that POC server up and booted it with a legacy network adapter or pressed F12, you would end up at this screen. So,
nice customized background just there.
Absolutely, we have a very nice customized background, although maybe a bit low res. You'll see here we've got a couple of options. Now, this wizard is certainly customizable. You can also remove it completely if you wanted to do a more hands-off deployment. If you didn't want any user interaction, we can remove that completely. But for the purposes of demonstration, we've left it here. So I'm going to select here. You'll see we've got a few task sequences. One here that's going to deploy a normal version of Office 2010, and another one that will deploy a copy of Office 2010 that's been pre-sequenced with AppV for you. So for me, that's a pretty big value out of this POC kit, because a lot of the customers that we're working with, they want to see how Office 2010 behaves inside AppV, and they want to have a look at the functionality and see if it's going to meet their requirements. But there's a fairly significant investment in time to sequence a copy of AppV yourself. So the fact that it's already been done here and ready to go, I think is a good benefit, because you can just click this button right here and have a look at how it runs.
Yeah, I think there are PhDs written in how to sequence Office 2010 for AppV appropriately. But yeah, this is an amazing way to just get set up very fast. I actually use it to build demo environments when I have to do presentations like this. It's much easier to use this kit than to build it by hand.
So you can see by default we've got another field here where we can select the domain to be joined or a work group, and if we want to put an org unit in there, we can do that. Any additional language packs, we can put those on. We've got those ready to go as well. And you can change regional settings, time zone, and install any additional applications. This, I like this screen for if you've got a more kind of user-driven desktop environment, then if you start adding additional applications into your MDT workbench, they'll just appear here automatically, and users can pick what they want and what they don't want. MDT will take care of the rest.
What's that interesting folder, Yoni?
One that says nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing to see there.
Okay.
So, you know.
So we've already customized this. That's not something you'll see.
That's not something you would normally see. That's me hedging against the demo gods, Alistair. Anyway. So we'll kick that off, and you can see MDT takes over from here, and we'll start building that machine. So you'll see it's now partitioning the disk, and away it'll go. Any slides back?
Yeah.
We'll come back to that later.
So a number of different tools, a lot of different acronyms. Who said Office deployment isn't cool with OEAT, OMPM, OCCI? Really, again, ISV add-ins, programs that interface with Office, whether it's SAP and those sorts of things. That's your tool to analyze that. That's probably one of the first tools that you'll run after getting an inventory of your hardware and your operating system. The Office Migration Planning Manager. This will run across all of your macros, your templates, your documents, and let you know what setting it is. In reality, we don't see many people running this across every single desktop and every single file share. Generally, what we do is we'll take a representative sample of 20,000, 30,000 documents to work out, on average, how are my documents? Is it a big problem? Is it a little problem? And what we find is that it's usually a little problem, but it's just a problem that we don't know anything about. And that's generally the challenge with file remediation. The Office Code Compatibility Inspector is when you find those one or two timesheet Excel spreadsheets or big Word documents that have all sorts of custom macros in it and those sorts of things that probably written by the finance guy, no one with an IT background at all. Perhaps they picked up a book like Teach Yourself Messing Up Office in 30 Days or something like that, or perhaps they just learned on the job and messed up Office as they went through. But the OCCI at least gives you a chance to step through and analyze that code and see what's broken, what's not, what will upgrade fine. Generally, the biggest challenge we see here, and what the OCCI will do, it will run through and it'll flag about 100% of macros saying you're not ready for a 64-bit version of Office. Because when you're running a 64-bit version of Office, you need to change every macro to support 64-bit. Macros aren't natively 64-bit aware, so you have to go there. If you've got an integer defined, you need to actually define it as a 64-bit integer for it to work properly, or a 32-bit integer. You really need to define that.
So the first thing to do when you fire up the OCCI is go into the options and untick the box that says scan for 64-bit compatibility.
That's right, yeah.
Otherwise, you fill your code up with comments.
And yeah, in case you haven't heard yet, we do not recommend that you deploy 64-bit Office 2010. Deploy Windows 7 64-bit, deploy Office 2010 32-bit. It's a much more stable experience. Really, we have a 64-bit for high-end scientific workstations, but not for the average user.
What if I edit 12 gigabyte Excel spreadsheets on a daily basis, Alistair?
Yeah, so if you're doing that as your job, then that's when the 64-bit comes into play. But generally, that's a very specialized task. And for those users that have that much data,
what are you doing?
Yeah, you can generally spend some time holding their hand and telling them how to change their macros to work. And then, of course, testing. Testing your VBA code, testing VSTO, testing your templates, testing your add-ins. That's not something that we provide any tools to automate all of the testing for. We automate a lot of the discovery, but you can use this desktop proof of concept kit to very quickly power up a test lab to run these things through and take your users through it as well. The interesting thing about Office is that users generally know more about Office than the IT department supporting Office. Users know more about Office than me, and I'm in the Office team. And the reason is that we don't use it every day. We're too busy focused on deployment or compatibility or those sorts of things. But for a user that's using Office 8 hours a day, they know that product like the back of their hand. And so when there are those grey IT or shadow IT investments that the users have built themselves, running in Access databases or Excel spreadsheets or Word macros or whatever it is, they're the subject matter experts for these applications, these departmental tools. So they're the ones that really need to do the testing. We can provide a testing environment very fast using the desktop proof of concept kit. So back to Yoni, let's see a demo of the Office Migration Planning Manager and the OEAT.
I think I can probably handle that.
Okay.
Excuse me. So before we get started, can I get you guys just a quick show of hands? Who's actually used or seen someone use the OMPM before today? One, you guys don't count. 1, 2, 3, you don't count either, Mike. 4 people in the whole room. Okay, so should probably start from the beginning here. So as Alistair said, we'll start with the OMPM, the Office Migration Planning Manager. This tool is designed to help you analyze your file stores, analyze the Office files that might be on your client computers, and have a look for known Office 2007-2010 compatibility errors. Am I necessarily saying that you should use this tool and scan all of your files? Maybe, maybe not. Should you use it at all? Maybe, maybe not. If you want to have a bit more of a discussion about Office compatibility in more detail and understand some of the scenarios around when you should use this tool, how you should use this tool, and how to really get the most out of the tool, then I'd suggest coming to my Office Compat session that's on at 11:30. For now, I'm just going to show you how it works and let you make up your own mind. So, back here on our proof of concept server, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up a command prompt and jump over to the OMPM folder in scan directory.
So the OMPM doesn't have a ribbon-like interface or anything like that?
The OMPM does have a ribbon-like interface at some points in the process, but we'll get to that. This is not one of those points. So, there's a few stages to using the OMPM. The first thing we need to do is scan our file shares, compatibility errors. This is done using an executable tool that I'll show you how to configure in a second. It'll go off and scan local paths or UNC paths, and it will collect back compatibility information as XML files, and it compresses those XML files into CAB files, and this significantly reduces the size of that content. So once we've scanned our data, the next thing that we need to do is import the results into an SQL database so that they can be analysed. That's done using another command line tool. Then the third stage is to analyse the results, and I'll show you that shortly as well. So you can see here we've come over to the scan directory in our OMPM folder, and we've got two critical files here. The first is offscan.exe, and the second is offscan.ini. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up offscan.ini, and basically this holds the configuration for how the tool works. So I'm going to set an ID here. This is just a unique identifier for this scan. And you can see here that we specify the path that the CAB files should be stored in. By the way, just stop me if you've got any questions. If I gloss over anything, I'm happy to be challenged on it on the spot. There's a whole bunch of more settings that you can see here, including whether or not to scan my documents and desktop. These options you'd turn on if you were doing a remote scan, if you're sending it out to scan everyone's desktops. Most cases I've seen, it's not how it runs. Normally you're scanning your file servers, so you wouldn't worry about that. You generally want to keep that deep scan and CAB file logs settings switched on. If you don't run a deep scan, all you get is file information. It doesn't do any compatibility testing. And then these are general options that I don't need to step through at this stage in too much detail. The only other place to look is just down here. You probably want to make sure that you've got this include and exclude directories set correctly there and there. So in this case, you can see we've got some POC files. Those are actually, they come with the proof of concept kit, so you can find them there if you want to scan those yourself. So we set that up. Yes, we save the changes. And then from our command line, all we need to do is run offscan.exe, no switches required, and away it goes. So you see here that OMPM scanner has kicked off its scan, and it's going through and taking a look at all the files in that folder. So Excel files, you'll notice, normally take a bit longer than everything else.
Depending on the size.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave those ones there. In fact, we'll just cancel it because that could take 5 or 10 minutes to run. And I'm going to jump back over here to some samples that we've prepared earlier. So, don't mind me. So what you can see here is a bunch of CAB files, and each of these CAB files, might actually just go with this mode here. Each of these CAB files contains a whole bunch of XML files in them. And for those who are interested, each XML file, it's going to extract it first. But each one contains information about the files. and
So
how they
there's
look.
one XML file per file that's scanned, is that correct?
One XML file per file that is scanned, and another one per scan, which contains overall information about the scan, what files were scanned and whatnot. So, once we've got that, what we need to do is import all of this information here into a SQL database. So, in order to do that, we'll just jump back out into the database folder here, and there's a few tools that we need to run. If you have a look here, specifically, we have create DB and delete DB. So those are, and import scans, which we'll have a look at in a second, but those are the ones that you really need to worry about. So, to start off with, we just create a database. That's right. Okay, we've successfully created that database. Now let's import data into it.
And again, all these steps are documented on this USB key, so don't feel like you need to memorize all these USB.
They do need to memorize all this right now. We're getting, yeah, no, there's no documentation.
For this step.
Oh, that's because it's scan samples. Okay.
All
All
right.
right.
This is how we do it, and really once you get those raw XML files, you can start to analyze it however you see fit, whether it's SQL, whether it's Excel, those sorts of things. This makes sense.
It generally does need to go into the database because it's a bit hard to analyze the data when it's sitting inside XML files that are compressed inside CAB files. Importing those XML files into the databases, you can use this tool. We've actually built a tool that we use to import the files into the database. That happened pretty quickly. When you've scanned 6 terabytes of your file servers on your central NAS in your data center, and you've got 2.5 gigabytes of compressed XML to import, you'll be sitting there for days. So there's a few considerations there that we can go through in a bit more detail in the other session. Okay, so now that we have some information in a database, let's have a look at it. So once again, we come back here and we head to the report folder, and in there, you'll see we have an OMPM access database, which I'll fire up quickly. Don't be fooled, there's no data in this access database. It's just a front end to, sorry about that was just me.
This is what happens when you change the name and get creative.
This is in fact what happens when you change the name and get creative.
So we're using Access here as the reporting tool. Again, if you're a wizard with reporting services, or you can do all sorts of fancy things with SQL or Power Pivot or however you want to do it, you can analyze the data that way. We just provide an Access front end to analyze this data really quickly.
Yeah. And if you want to have a look at some other reporting options for OMPM, then we're going to go through that in the session later on today. So you can see here there's a few different areas to look at. The main place where you'll find information is in this Office 2010 compatibility. And you can see here that we've got information on the types of issues. We've got some files there that are in old format. We've got some VBA code and some embedded documents. And you can also see here that we've got a few computers here. We've got Brian's desktop and a bunch of other machines. And there you go. So I won't go into too much more detail on that, but there's the basis of the reporting engine for OMPM at work. And what were we going to have a quick look at OEAT as well? Okay. So taking a step back for a second, now that we've got an idea of our file compatibility, the other aspect to look at here was in regards to add-in compatibility. So, you've got a whole fleet of machines out there. Potentially everyone has admin rights, potentially they don't. You could have a whole bunch of add-ins and plugins and other pieces of software that interact with Office and could potentially have compatibility issues. In my experience, the add-ins and the plugins that register themselves as add-ins and plugins tend not to be a problem because you can find that information out fairly easily using config manager reporting and that kind of thing. Where we often run into trouble is where you have applications that someone has written that are using parts of the Office COM APIs or something to that effect. If you've got applications that haven't registered themselves as add-ins, but using hooks into, for say, Outlook to send emails or configure calendar items or something like that, those ones can be tricky. You'd change the version of Office out underneath them. No one knew that they actually interacted with that application, and bam, they stopped working. So OEAT will pick those up, and I'll give you a quick demo of how it works.
And one of the other really interesting things that we do with Office from a developer point of view is that we allow developers to build add-ins that live inside a document. They don't have to be installed. They just travel around as the document moves around. There's essentially .NET code running an application inside that document format. That's great, really portable from a development point of view. It's a nightmare from an IT management point of view because you don't know where these documents are. They're hard to find because they don't show up as an installed add-in. They're installed within the document themselves. Anyway.
And so what OEAT is doing is it's actually going to sit there and hijack the user's computer and look at it's a bit of a strong word, maybe.
Monitor.
It's going to monitor the computer's usage and look for anything that's going hunting for the COM locator's registry keys. Anyway, so there's two general modes that you can run this. Let's get rid of that. I was just testing that earlier. There's two modes you can run this tool with. The first is from the GUI interface, and you would normally do this, use this method if you were, if you say you built up a machine that had your SOE on it and every piece of software that you have ever used in your environment, you could use the tool in this mode to scan that. It's quick and it's easy. So I'll show you how that works now. All we do is come along here, say that we're going to scan the system. It didn't work. There we go. No, we don't want to do a passive scan because we'll be sitting there for an hour.
Yeah. So passive scan, you essentially let it run in the background. You could run that for an hour, a week, a month on some users' computers just to see if there are any of those documents hanging around that have code in them or anything like that.
I'll speak to that in a second. And then after you've done that,
yeah. That's a good question.
I'll speak to it in a second.
Right. So the question was, how long do you run a passive scan to ensure that you've captured, all the possible applications that could run? And the reality is, some of these really critical workloads happen at some points in the year. If you're in retail, you may have specific Christmas reporting that lives inside an Excel spreadsheet. If you're doing financial close and reporting every quarter or at the end of every year, for annual reports and those sorts of things, they can sit there for a year and never get used. Likewise, you may have a employee onboarding or offboarding process, that what you do when someone resigns or leaves the company. You may have some HR automated processes that are only used at certain times in the year. So it is quite hard to predict when to run these sorts of scans. Again, this is user-driven and user-centric sort of applications. So it pays to actually talk to your users and work out what they find important, what their business processes are, and which documents they use.
Absolutely. So what you can see here now is the report that's come out of the back of the OEAT, and it's got a summary of the machine. In this case, we've only scanned one computer. We've done scans that have come back with thousands of computers. The results look much the same, except you have a few more in the list here. And you can see that we've got a few add-ins that have been identified, and there's a fair amount of information there about where they're living and what DLLs they're using and registry keys they're referencing and whatnot. And then afterwards you've got a bit of just contextual information that might be helpful for you if you don't have something like Config Manager to work with. The other method of running this tool is using a more using a software delivery mechanism such as Config Manager. And if you want to do that, you'll see that there's another option in here that you can use to create a settings file that will be used by the installation. So you can see here, okay, we want to run a passive scan. That's fine. we want everything to go back to POC server / share. It's fine. Okay, can't find it. Bear with me. All right, it can go in there. And there you go. Okay, so now we've got an XML file here and our OEAT file. And all you need to do is take those two files there, put them into a config manager package, and push them out to your end computers that you want to run the scan on. Consideration here is that the results are sent back to the share that we specified once the scan is completed. So if you set a 5-hour scan time and then people reboot their computers during that period, the scan will never finish and it will never send any results back. So to get the best data back out of this tool, what we normally suggest with Config Manager is set the tool to do a half an hour scan, and then you set it with a mandatory advertisement to repeat every 45 minutes, and then it will finish every half an hour, have a 15-minute break, and then start over again. And you can do that time and time through the day, and that's generally how you'll capture the best data. So there you go, ONPM and OEAT.
Thanks, Yoni. So once we have an understanding of the environment, the next thing to really look at is how we want to manage and secure the Office installations. And there's a number of ways to do this. There's group policies, which we can configure a lot of different settings inside of Office. There's about 4,000 different settings inside of Office that you can configure with group policy. You can be there for quite a long time if you want to configure each one of those. But really out of the box, we've tried to make Office 2010 a lot more secure. And so all of the settings that are enabled and disabled by default are really to make the most secure operating environment for the most amount of people. There's also engineering changes in the actual product to make it much more secure as well. Support for DEP, being able to block particular file types, being able to block particular versions of file types, being able to provide file validation. Every time you open up a binary file format in Office 2010, it does a check to make sure that's a valid file format, not just a corrupted or a fuzzed file that can potentially crash Office. We also have an ActiveX kill bit control. We respect that. So if you have a particular nasty ActiveX control that's floating around, you can actually just you can actually disable that to run anytime it runs in your environment, much like you can do with Internet Explorer. We have a protected view. Who's using Office 2010 today? You've probably seen protected view when you open up a document from the internet or from an untrusted area. We'll open it up in a read-only mode. And that read-only mode is really running like that so that if it's a potentially dangerous file, it can't crash the rest of Office. It will only crash that sandbox environment. And of course, the improved user experience to make it easy to understand what's going on. If you remember back to Office 2003, you'd get, hey, this file is potentially unsafe. Do you want to see it or not? So, well, of course you want to see it. You want to know whether it's an important file or not. So you make those trust decisions without seeing the document. Now in the protected view, open up the protected view and show you the document, and then you can work out whether you want to fully trust it or not after that state. But really, when you're managing group policy objects, especially for Office, there's a number of things you have to do. You kind of find out what you're doing with Office and Windows 7 and Internet Explorer and all the other applications you want to run. And then you realize that there's thousands of GPOs to choose from, what you want to change, and all those sorts of things. And so you read the documentation, you study up, time passes, and you come up with your organization-specific GPOs. Your documentation, if you're lucky, you craft a documentation to explain the reasons that you've made all of those changes. A larger organization, you may even have to do a threat and risk assessment of these changes that you want to make sure the security guys are happy. Security guys are never happy, but less angry. And then finally, you can use System Center or however you're going to deploy out those group policy objects. Deploy out that desktop image, and there you go. We have a tool called the Security Compliance Manager from this Solution Accelerator team. This is a fantastic tool to really speed up that deployment, speed up that whole cycle of finding out what group policy objects you want to use. And I'm sure that Victor's in the wrong room. He's looking for meeting room 7 and the link session. But really to secure the desktop using Security Compliance Manager, you load up Security Compliance Manager that sets some security baselines for you to choose from. A number of security baselines. First is the enterprise client baseline. This is a more locked down client than the out-of-the-box Office experience. And then we have a really locked one, the specialized security, limited functionality security baseline. This is for highly sensitive environments or perhaps environments that are in untrusted state. Maybe it's a kiosk PC at a mine site, or maybe it's customer facing, or maybe it's just using such sensitive data that you want to really lock down every possible angle for extension in that environment as well.
Maybe it's your kid's PC.
Kids PC. Kids have got macros. And you have setting packs for each different products to load in here to work with it. So you can use that, and on day one then, you use the Security Compliance Manager management framework to understand what all those baseline settings are. All of those settings are pre-documented with risks and countermeasures when you're changing any of those settings. You may still want to make some specific application customization, so you can load in whatever is specific for your organization, and then you can deploy that out really easily as well. So that's at a high level. Let's have a look at what the tool does. Number 2.
Yep.
Kind of very simple here. This is the Security Compliance Manager. It's a free download again. It's also on this proof of concept kit. And it will load in some baselines. You can see here we've got some Microsoft baselines defined. We've also got a POC baseline. These are customizations that you can define with your own customizations in it. But if we drill into, say, Office here, and we'll drill into the enterprise client setting pack. And just a word of warning, the first time you run this tool, it will actually check over the internet to load in any updated security baselines here as well. So it can take some time. But you can see here, let's look at one. Excel data recovery, bad example.
Good mouse there if you want.
Okay, yeah. So we have an Excel data recovery setting here. And we define out the vulnerability, we define out the potential impact of changing this GPO setting, and the countermeasure of what you can do if you do want to enable this feature as well. So it's really, really useful. You can look really smart by putting together long and wordy threat and risk assessments with well thought out countermeasures and impacts to your security team. Just don't tell them about this tool, otherwise they'll do it as well. But a really cool tool here, and then we can define that. We can change the setting. You can see here in the top right that there's a default setting, there's the Microsoft baseline setting, and then there's whatever customization that you want to do as well. So it's just a nicer way to look through all of the group policy objects that you've set up and controlled. So Yoni, perhaps I'll get you to talk about image creation and customization.
Okay. I didn't know I was talking about image creation and customization. I can do that though.
Yep. Oh, well, we'll start with the Office customization tool.
Office image creation
Details,
customization.
yeah.
Okay, so that's a bit more expected. So when it comes to the deployment of Office, you've got a few different options. You've got where's that? We don't have that slide there with the different deployment options, do we?
It's coming later.
That's all right. I think we went through that in the session yesterday. In any case, so when you're looking to deploy Office, you've got image-based deployments using light touch, zero touch, or another method. You've also got network share-based deployments or virtualized deployments as well. Before we move on, should we jump in quickly and have a look at how our build was going
Sure.
for our other machine there? Just pull that up quickly.
Yeah. But yeah, the Office customization is done a number of ways. In the volume license product, there's actually a setup.exe/admin command that you'll run, and that will open up in the Office customization tool. This is really the tool where you can set a lot of the preferences that you want to apply to that document, to that image install as well. This is different to group policy objects. The preferences, these are things that the user can start. They're really guidelines for the user at what will be set by default as well. But you can set things like, here's where My Documents are stored, or here are the SharePoint sites that should be showing up on day one, and those things. So how's the install going, Yoni?
It's going pretty well. Let's have a look. So this is the machine that we kicked off earlier, and we can see that it's done. We've got a notification there saying as much. And we hit the finish button. You can see here we've got a Windows 7 machine that's going to reboot itself. While it's doing all that, building off what Alistair was saying a second ago with your Office settings, really the thing to remember when deciding where to configure various items inside Office is that you have to look at the difference between where are the settings that I want to define as defaults and where are the settings that I want to configure as policy, as lockdown. So you might say, okay, here are my security settings. These are to be greyed out. I want my users to be able to touch these. These settings, on the other hand, I want to set the defaults. I want to give my users a hint. Here's how you might like it to be set up, but if you want to change it, fine, you can go ahead and do that. So the settings that you want to define as preferences, I suppose, need to go into your Office customization tool package that we'll take a look at in a second. And then the settings that you want to configure as policy to be locked down need to go into your group policy. This machine should boot back up now. So it has. I should remember what the password is now. Just follow industry best practice and log on to all of our desktops using the domain administrator password.
That's what I do.
Redmond/administrator.
Yeah. Pass that word one.
So there you go. So we've got a machine that's logged in here now, and it's got Windows 7 on it, and it also has, we picked the virtualized version of Office 2010. So if anyone's interested to have a look at how that looks, you can see we've got all of our Office 2010 applications sitting here. We might not be able to get to the AppV server at the moment. I'll come back to it. So how did we get there? I mentioned before that this was all done using an MDT Light Touch deployment. Can I get a show of hands in the room who's worked with MDT 2008 or 2010 before? Okay, so maybe a bit less than half the room. You definitely don't count. So all right, so I'll quickly step you through what we did to build that deployment out. You see, if you open up the workbench here, you've got a number of different nodes. Basically, applications are what they sound like, so we can configure applications in here to be deployed silently, either all your deployments or some of them. As we saw, we had the tick boxes there with the options which applications to install. We have operating system images. Here's where you would store both your original Windows. Did you have a question? No? Either your original Windows media or customized images that you've created. We've got a section to deploy drivers. And then these last ones here are more advanced stuff around manually adding Windows updates and creating the task sequences. So if we have a look at that, we can see here that the applications that we have deployed, in this case, we pushed out the AppV client and the AppV Office Deployment Kit and the Office AppV package. We also have a Windows 7 Enterprise install media sitting there, and some hardware drivers that we've imported for various models. Like I said before, if you want to go into detail about MDT and how it all hangs together, then I'd suggest going along to some of the MDT sessions, the one straight after this in 1B. And you can see the last thing that we have here is our task sequence, which is what kind of pulls it all together. So you can see here we install an operating system, apply network settings, and then you can see there that there's all of our Office and AppV installation steps running through there.
Now, can you go straight into the OCT from the deployment workbench as well?
You certainly can. So you can see, if we go back up in here into our applications, we've got an Office 2010 application here that is not the App V1. This is just a normal Office 2010 install. And some of you might have noticed already that we have a big Office Products tab. Now, if I, just for demonstration purposes, if I open this up, that's also an Office product, you'll see that we don't have that Office Products tab there. So in here, this is a really neat extra piece of functionality that allows us to configure product keys and some basic information about the display level and the install level and whatnot. From there, we can launch straight into the Office Customization tool. Hands up in the room who's used the Office Customization tool either for 2007 or 2010. Heaps more people than have used MDT. That's interesting. Okay. So what you might not have known is that you can get to it straight here from MDT.
And it's pretty much the same tool as it was in 2007. Just more options.
They changed the color of the banner that goes across the top, critically. So to step you through that really quickly, I'm conscious of the time here. We can set our organisation name there. What I normally do is come in here and accept the details and set that to basic. And then you can change various different setup properties, add and remove shortcuts, and you can see here what we were talking about earlier. This is pretty much every user setting you could possibly want to set for Office 2010. Roughly equivalent to what you'll see in group policy, the same settings you'll find here. So, for example, something that we do fairly commonly in enterprise deployments is we go into the Office 2010 section, and under miscellaneous, we enable this setting here that says suppress the recommended settings dialog. You know that thing that pops up the first time you run an Office app that says, hey, do you want to use Windows Update, or do you want to not have updates, or do you want to have some updates? Well, guess what? You're probably managing that yourselves as administrators, so we don't need to worry about it. So we turn that on, and then all we need to do is save that file back into the right place. And away we go.
Great.
Switch back.
So a couple of other things to think about when you're looking at Office deployment. Office is a language-neutral product. And what we mean by that, in the past there was Office, an English language pack product, and then a language pack that you bolt onto the top of it. In 2010, essentially what we've done is separated out all the language components from Office. So when you install Office for the first time, what you're getting is Office that speaks no language at all, and then you layer on an English pack, or you layer on another pack and another pack and another pack. That essentially removes any French users from seeing any English pop-ups when something goes wrong or something we didn't think about as well. So that is quite important to think about. Each language pack can be quite big. So if you are supporting a multiple language pack environment, you're adding, depending, 40 meg, a gig each time that you're adding another language pack as well. You can customize all of this with config XML or using the MDT. By default, essentially it's going to pick up what language is on the operating system, and that's the language that it's going to install Office by as well. There's also proofing tools for each language as well, and the proofing tools are really to help you look through the document in a different way. These are big files as well. You can customize which proofing tools you install at every time as well. So 2 things to think about there. So let's move on. Let's talk about the end user readiness capabilities. And we won't spend too much time on this because there's a lot to cover on end user adoption. But suffice to say, there's some of these tools that are already included in the proof of concept kit. These are tools to help your user get ready, whether it's interactive guide showing you the Office 2003 experience and the Office 2010 experience. We provide that there. You can customize things like Ribbon Hero to deploy. But there is a lot of tools out there to handle end user readiness. So make sure you do have a change management plan in place when you go to do your deployment.
If you want to know more about Office end user readiness, I'd recommend, if you didn't catch Alistair and Paul's session yesterday, then you should go and download that off Channel 9.
That was OFS 305.
305.
Yeah. Okay, so now we get to the exciting bit. We've packaged all this up and we get to the deployment options. And there's a number of different options that you can take for deployment. There's deploying via a network share, there's an IT managed deployment, there's application virtualization or presentation virtualization as well. The old network share deployment is not really one that you do outside of IT. That's essentially you can customize all these files using the OCT and all the tools we've shown you here and have that setting. So by default, when you install those bits, it'll just install with the settings that you've defined as well.
It is viable. We did a deployment a couple of weeks back, a couple of months back actually. The customer had about 200 seats spread across 4 sites, and they hadn't made the investment in software distribution infrastructure in the past, and an Office 2010 deployment wasn't a big enough trigger to get them to go and invest in Config Manager. So we built them, but they also didn't want to have disparate installations going on where people would click different buttons and ended up with different installations, and they had their administrators, the PAs doing the installation, so we built them an Office customization tool file that prepared a silent installation for them, and then we put it on a network share and pointed all the PAs to it. So it is viable in some scenarios.
That's right. I mean, IT managed deployment is really the one that
is better.
I see most people use. Application virtualization, we get a lot of questions about AppV in Office 2010, and it is fully supported technology. You can use AppV to deploy it. Fully supported, that means that someone will take your calls when something goes wrong when you package up AppV. It's a fantastic technology that we have a lot of hope for in the future, but to be perfectly honest, to this audience here, there are a lot of nuances on it. If you're not using AppV already, please don't start with Office. Office is a big, complicated package to package. It requires some extra AppV kits to install to make sure that the licensing and the connections with printers and other applications and SharePoint and Exchange all work appropriately. So there is a lot to consider.
It's very time consuming as well, and one of the challenges with sequencing Office is that if you don't have experience doing it and you miss steps, which is easy enough to do, the guide that Alistair's team recently built was how many pages long?
It's about 30 pages.
30 pages long. And if you miss something in page 2, you'll only find out about it in page 29, and then it's, guess what, start again.
Yeah.
So
it's really interesting, and I would really recommend this proof of concept kit, because we do talk you through it and we show you how to do it and those sorts of things.
It's already done.
don't do it for your end users. It shouldn't be your common Office deployment mechanism. You should be doing a bare metal install, MSI-based install for Office 2010. That's the one that works. That's the one that we're most familiar with. That's the one that is best.
It's a really good technology to use for piloting.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of pilots, or you virtualize it when you just want to test something and you want to get a side-by-side experience. Potentially, if you have a glaring need for Office 64-bit, you can potentially use that to virtualize Excel 64-bit and push it out there. But you should really consider it as the advanced topic for deployment and not something that unless you like pain and suffering, not something that you want to do every day. And just quickly talk about Office 365. Office 365 does include an Office client component called Office Pro Plus, and it is a little bit different to your Office volume license media that you've bought in the past and you're buying today. One of the big differences is that this is a user-based license rather than a device-based license. With Office 2010 volume licensing, you actually just license the PC endpoint. You don't license the user itself. With Office 365 and the cloud service, you're licensing the user, not the device. So that does change the activation methods and those sorts of things as well. It's essentially the first time you run it, it's going to ask you for a username and password to authenticate against the cloud, and then every 30 days it's going to re-authenticate with that cloud as well. That poses a number of other challenges, such that application virtualization, Citrix, RDS, presentation virtualization, whatever you want to call it, aren't supported when you're using the Office 365 bits. That's not to say that you can't buy Office 2010 volume licensing and use that against Exchange Online and SharePoint Online. That works fine. That's what we expect most large organizations to do. This Office Pro Plus 365 service is a little bit different. It's much more designed to be end-user deployed however you want. There is another option. It's the Office 365 portal. You can send someone a URL link to the Office 365 portal, and they can download Office to their heart's content. You don't really have to manage the licenses in the same way as you do with volume licensing media, because the first time they run this is going to prompt them to a username and password. They leave the organization, you just reassign their license to someone else, and the next 30 days, the software goes into reduced functionality mode, and they get a read-only experience again as well.
As a deployment guy, I really like that method. It's the make it somebody else's problem method.
Yeah. You can never fully make deployment someone else's problem, though. It always comes back to you.
Try. Put the dream on the beach.
Yeah. So because these bits are different, it's almost the same for the user. It's still Office 2010. It's still Word. It's still Excel. It looks the same, smells the same from an end user point of view. But to an IT guy, it is slightly different. And so, you should perhaps talk about some of the things that are different with Office 365 Pro Plus.
Yeah, from a technical point of view. So probably the first thing that you'll notice when you download the Office 365 Pro Plus bits is that you don't have an Office customization tool installed in there. That's going to be problematic if you want to do any kind of automated deployment. That's not to say that the Office 365 bits won't accept an MSP file from the Office customization tool. They're just not there. So I'll show you how we can get that running as well. It's also fairly heavily patched. You could potentially remove all the individual updates that are sitting in there, and we'll look at that in a second as well, and just replace it with Service Pack 1. And beyond that, the real difference technically is the licensing method, which I'll show you in a second as well. So rather than talk about it, why don't we have a look?
Yep.
So what I had in mind here, guys, as a bit of a last demo, is to show you how you can take the Office 365 Pro Plus bits that you download off the portal and deploy that, customize it and deploy it using MDT Light Touch. So that's what we'll do.
And just a quick show of hands, who's considering Office 365 at the moment in their organization?
Who's already using Office 365 in production in their organization? 1, 2, 3 organizations. Cool.
That's great. Yeah, you're essentially running the same Exchange environment as most of my team in the Office division. So it's one of the rare occasions where if the Exchange server on our end goes down, you get the president, Steve Ballmer, chasing down to try and fix your problems, which is kind of nice to know that.
Everyone's running on it over there, aren't they?
We're getting there, yeah.
So what I've done is, to save time here, even though there is a blisteringly fast internet connection on this virtual machine, I thought I'd download some stuff in advance. So, what have I got? I've downloaded, and then failed to move around properly. The Office, that Microsoft Office.exe there is the Pro Plus 365 bits. There's Office Service Pack 1, and there is the admin templates that includes the Office customization tool. Just for fun, I've also... Sorry? I can tell you that. So you've got 790 meg of Office Pro Plus. You'll notice it's a little bit bigger than the normal download. We'll fix it in a second, don't worry. Service Pack 1 is just the normal Service Pack, and the rest of that stuff's irrelevant. We've also got the sign-in assistant here, which...
Exactly. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe package up something silent and then give it to them on a USB stick or something like that.
Yeah.
We've also got Link there. So I'm conscious of the time. We've only got a few minutes left, so I'll see if I can race through it. Put your hand up if you want me to slow down or speed up or something like that. No one put their hand up for me to speed up. That's good. All right, so we'll jump into the install directory here. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to extract this Office installation out, and it'll look like a familiar Office install after that. So we just use the extract switch, and we'll send it to cinstall, and we'll call it Office 365 Pro Plus. And away that goes.
It is an unfortunately confusing name, so sorry about that.
What is?
Office Pro Plus as opposed to Office 2010 Pro Plus. Is kind of
Yeah.
how we refer to it.
It's gone backwards.
Yeah,
So it's 2010, now it's 365.
Essentially, the beauty of the Office 365 service is that it's always up to date. So you always get the latest version. When we release next version of Office, next version of Exchange, you transition across the new services. So we kind of took the numbers out and thought that that was good enough, but it's still confusing. So we're trying to refer to it as Office Pro Plus brackets Office 365, just so to avoid confusion.
Okay, so now that we've extracted all of that out, we'll just do something quickly for our friend over here. Control A, delete.
So the updates folder is where you put all the updates that you want to essentially slipstream into the Office deployment. And for the Office 365 bits, because end users may be downloading it, we want to make sure that they get all that at once. They get all of the updates that they need to connect into Office 365 straight away. So,
yep, absolutely. So what I've got here is the admin templates that you can download. We'll put a link up for those. And in here, for those of you who are familiar with using the Office customization tool in the normal Pro Plus bits, you'll notice that there's an admin folder inside your Office installation. Here there isn't. So we just need to copy that in there. And that will enable us to use the Office customization tool from inside MDT. The last thing I wanted to do very quickly there is you can see here I've extracted out all of Service Pack 1 for Office 2010, and I'm going to take all of those, go into the Updates directory, and drop those in there as well.
This is exactly the same way if you were using Office 2010 Pro Plus that you would slipstream
Service Pack 1. Absolutely.
We don't even need to slipstream anymore. That kind of technology is irrelevant with 2010, the new approach to using the updates folder.
You just drop it in there and then the Office installation will go looking for them automatically. All right, so to race through this is how you can deploy Office 365 Pro Plus in under 5 minutes. We'll jump into our Applications folder here, and I'm going to create a new folder called Office 365. Again, sorry for racing through this. I need to create 3 applications here. The first application I'm going to create, I'm going to call Microsoft Office 365 Pro Plus. The directory that we're going to is our install directory here with our Office 365 folder. Just save a bit of time and move everything. Sorry?
Move versus copy.
Yes, move versus copy just saves us a bit of time here because we have to,
Here's one you prepared earlier.
This is where Mike looks up. Destination name.
Yeah.
That doesn't look right. Sorry?
You had it open. Yeah.
Oh, of course, yeah. Should be fine. Thanks, Mike. Let's just try that again.
Nothing like someone sweating while on stage in a demo.
I'm not sweating.
I'm glad that...
I'll get this done in no time. There we go. Thanks, Mike. We're all good. Next one. We'll put in Microsoft Link 365. Get our directory there. Link. Move it. And that's the directory we want to create. Here's my command line. And you can grab all these off the, I'll chuck this stuff up online on my blog afterwards if you want those command lines for easy reference. And one more.
So what's this last one, Yoni?
It's the super quick sign-on assistant.
So this is a little tool you install in addition to Office 2010 or Office 2010, Office 365 Pro Plus that helps navigate the sign-in process against the cloud service.
I like this method. I deploy, you talk.
And it's a really simple tool. If you ever use BPOS, there was a sign-in tool that would actually ask for usernames and passwords. This really just makes sure that you can connect to the services, the ports are open, and the appropriate service packs are on the machine. It's ready to connect to 365. It's a really simple tool. Doesn't change much your desktop at all. So you're defining a task sequence that we'll go through.
So I'm making a task sequence, install Windows and Office 365 quickly. Away we go. We'll pick a Windows 7 media that we've got here already, not put it in a product. Okay. Set an administrator password. And really quickly, it's got to be the fastest MDT task sequence creation ever.
That's great.
Office
These
365.
guys want to use you for the deployment. What, they'd only need to pay for half an hour of your time? Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Thanks for that. All right, so we'll put Office 365 on there. Do another one quickly. Install link. Hey, we're in a hurry here, right? Okay, and there you have it. From there, all right, 5 minutes. There is an Office 365 Pro Plus deployment from start to finish in 5 minutes. Yeah. Should we take a quick look at how it comes out on the other side? Here's one I prepared earlier. So once that build completes, you'll be left with a screen that looks exactly like that. And that's the sign-on for Office 365. Do you want to speak through what that's doing quickly, Al?
Yeah, essentially, because it's a user-based license, you enter in your Office 365 account name and password, and then that will talk to the cloud service, negotiate a proper key, and every 30 days it will check back to make sure that it's valid. There's one extra step. Unfortunately, this isn't a step you can script up when you're doing your deployment. So if you are deploying Office Pro Plus from 365, each user will get prompted by this for their own 365 credentials, even if you set up ADFS and those sorts of things as well.
No, I know it's done that. I don't have time to change it. I had to change the network settings on the VM to get internet access out of there so it won't sign on, but trust us, it works. Go on.
So, thank you very much for your time. Grab your POC kit. I hope most of you have got your POC kit. If not, I have some more kits up here. And we have the kit on DVD down at the showcase floor as well. So thank you very much for your time and happy deploying.
Thanks, guys.